In the next part of our interview with Rosalia Bollen, we hear some of the moving stories she's encountered and the impact the conflict is having on vulnerable young minds in Gaza. In part 2 of my interview with UNICEF's Rosalia Bollen, she tells me about the bravery and resilience of children in Gaza during their daily fight for survival.
The way he put it was, my eyes went to heaven before I did. He spoke about nearly dying, but he did survive, but his eyes died. That's how he put it. And to hear that from a 5-year-old child is very impressive and just heartbreaking.
They're encountering sights, sounds, and smells that no child should have to witness. And it's taking its toll on the mental and physical health of children as food and aid shortages continue. Rosalia says the international community's inability to end the conflict means a constant fight against cynicism and donor fatigue. Of course, for the children in Gaza, witnessing the huge scale of death and personal loss and insecurity, that is a huge challenge. How do you go about talking to the children who are experiencing this war without eroding their sense of safety or security and hope?
And I would say, before I answer that question, it's not just the exposure to death and seeing bodies in the street and seeing relatives and friends being harmed yourself, but it's also this permanent state of anxiety and toxic stress, right? It's the fact that even on a day where maybe you don't see any bodies, because of this constant rumbling of planes and this constant buzzing of drones, you have nonstop the feeling that you are at risk. UNICEF is working with experts in mental health and psychosocial support who have been trained in working with traumatized children. The challenge here is that those facilitators are often traumatized themselves. They've also lost their homes. But UNICEF has been creating spaces, child-friendly spaces, where children can access adequate care, where they can talk through what they've experienced in a safe way. We use lots of art, we use lots of drawings, we actually use music, we use play, we use photos. Photos from Gaza before the war, photos of the destruction in Gaza, photos from other places around the world, so that they can talk about what's happening more from a third-person perspective, as if it's happening to someone else. But yeah, the children that I encounter, we don't, when we interview them, we don't press them. We start with small talk. I usually ask what they want to be when they grow up, what their hobbies are. I ask them what they've been doing that particular morning. And then, if appropriate, we can segue in talking about what has happened to them.
I'm pretty certain, Rosalia, that you have many, many stories, but can you think of one particular story of where a child in Gaza has given you the sense of profound resilience?
Well, all children are incredible. They still are able to make jokes. They're incredibly generous. They insist on sharing a toy with me, or if they have if they happen to have a biscuit or something, they also want to share it with me, which is really striking. But one particular story I'd highlight is the story of Leanne. It's a 13-year-old girl. She lives in a tent next to my UNICEF guest house in Rafah Mawasi. The way that we met was that Leanne was sitting against a wall around our guest house, because on that wall we have security lights. In the tent, people don't have electricity. So the moment that the sun goes down, it's pitch dark. It's literally pitch dark. You don't see a thing. And Leanne came to our guest house every evening to read a book. So I actually, for the first time I saw her on the screen inside our guest house, who was transmitting images from our cameras. It was like, is that a little girl sitting against our guest house. I went outside. She was reading a book. And she explained that she didn't have light and electricity in her tent and that she was trying to continue reading and that she missed school a lot. Her mother is an English language teacher, and she actually spoke quite some English, so it was easy to communicate with her. As we were speaking, she then revealed that she got injured last year in June. She was hit by a stray bullet. Immediately after the incident, her father rushed her to the field hospital where they tried to extract the bullet, but they couldn't because it's stuck in her rib cage. So it requires very delicate, sophisticated surgery. And Leanne was actually waiting to move out of Gaza to access medical treatment. As of today, she still has that bullet inside her ribcage. She feels it when she lays down, so she has difficulty sleeping. That's when she feels the bullet. She recently went for a checkup, and the X-rays revealed that the bullet has been moving down, that it has moved about 4 centimeters down. So her life is actually in danger because the bullet may damage organ tissue, veins, as it is moving inside her body. But it's not deterring her from trying to read during the day. She's very busy helping her mom. She has several siblings. She helps her mom fetch water. She helps clean the tent. She plays with her siblings. She goes to a temporary learning space a couple of hours a week. And every evening she's underneath that security light, trying to do some homework or to practice English or to read whatever material she got her hands on.
That's remarkable. What do you think hope looks like now for the children of Gaza with the schools and playgrounds and everything around them so destroyed?
And children don't understand why it's destroyed. They don't understand what it is that they did to deserve that. But despite this tremendous destruction, they're still hopeful that it's going to stop and that they will be able to go back home and that they're going to be able to help their parents rebuild their home. They say the moment there's a ceasefire, they will go with Papa Mama back home and they will help clean the home and then everything will be as it used to be. Now, if you drive through Gaza, regardless of whether it's southern Gaza, central Gaza, or northern Gaza, you're really driving through a moon landscape. There are certain areas, for instance, in the most southern part in Rafah, where not a single building is still standing. There was this campaign about a year ago to save Rafah from the invasion. Today, the city of Rafah no longer exists. It's wiped off the earth. There's certain neighborhoods in Gaza City that are just no longer standing. It's as if a massive earthquake has taken place and destroyed everything. In other areas, there's still buildings standing that seem to defy the laws of gravity. They look like they could collapse pretty imminently. But people live in them. People use them. As we also use them if they've been assessed as relatively safe as distribution points or as health clinics. So people really carry on as good as they can. But as to these dreams of children to go back to their homes, when I see what's left of Gaza, I'm very pessimistic.
Surrounded by such devastation as you've described, what have you seen of how families maintain dignity and humanity?
When you visit people in their tents, I'm always impressed with how clean and organized the tent is, because what we're talking about is a small single space that is often shared by 7, 8, 9 relatives, people of the same family. And so you enter, and usually during the day they've moved all the mattresses to one side, they've stacked them onto one another. You always see women grooming, swiping out the dust, which in Gaza is actually very challenging, especially in the Al Mawasi area, which is a very beachy, sandy area. But people really try to maintain a sense of normalcy. Parents try to create some sort of normalcy for their children. There's several children whom I interviewed, including Leanne. And after the interview, her mother asked me if there was anything I could help them with, to find maybe a birthday cake, maybe some ingredients to make a cake, or a gift. So parents really want to maintain this sense of normalcy, but also of the children's dignity. So birthdays are something that parents really care about, and despite the impossible circumstances, they do what they can to organize something for their children. They'll invite the children from the neighbors, and to have some sort of a party.
From your experience there, did you hear much talk among the people of Gaza of wanting to leave?
People are just desperate. I think at this point in time, people that I've spoken to, they didn't explicitly say they wanted to leave. They really just want the bombs to stop. As I said, they don't even ask for assistance. The first thing is for the bombings to stop. They say that they can find a way, but they need the bombardments to stop immediately.
Much of your work depends on being able to work with Israeli and Hamas representatives. And how do you balance that? How are you able to create that kind of relationship to ease your way of doing work?
I mean, thankfully, that type of relationship management is being dealt with by our office in Jerusalem. So I'm not directly, personally involved in it. But yeah, key is that all the sides understand what it is that we're doing, what it is that we're trying to achieve, and that we're doing it in line with global methodologies like we do everywhere in the world, that we're not making exceptions for anyone, that we're not prioritizing anyone that we wouldn't prioritize in other crisis settings. So a good amount of time goes into explaining the concepts that we work with, explaining our programming. Our programming is incredibly vast. We do water and sanitation repairs, routine immunization, screening for malnutrition, temporary learning spaces, the reunification of children who've become separated from their parents, so children who are without parental care, support to children with disabilities. It's a really broad scala of activities. So it's also understandable that the outside world doesn't really know what UNICEF and others are up to.
Well, you're speaking to us from the Netherlands. While you're there in Europe, do you feel that any part of you is still back in Gaza?
It absolutely is. I'm in sort of constant touch with my team who's still in Gaza, and with other colleagues who are on the ground. And I'm trying to support them as good as I can while I'm being temporarily here, hoping to move back in as soon as possible. But yeah, it's something you carry with you. It's really hard to disconnect as long as these incessant bombardments continue, as long as children continue to be killed. You can't really let your guard down and sort of relax.
So when you are away from it, are there any particular sights, sounds, images that haunt you or stay with you while you're remotely away?
The images that I find hard to forget is something that is currently a lot on my mind. There's several women who are pregnant whom I interviewed in March. One lady who was 4 months pregnant, another lady who was 6 months pregnant, and a third lady who was 7 months pregnant. And I'm constantly thinking about them because the conditions in which they will have to give birth are frankly inhuman. They're very cruel. No woman should have to give birth in these circumstances, but they have no choice. And so I wonder how they're doing. I hope they're okay. I wonder if they're able to access care in case things don't go as planned. So they're very much on my mind.
Some of the stories I've seen, videos you've done, they're quite striking and very touching. I want you to tell me a little bit about the 5-year-old boy Saad. who you described in one video, who was hit by a bomb, or at least was in a place that was bombed. It fractured his skull, he got burns over his body, and he lost his eyesight. And he said something regarding the loss of his eyesight that I'd like you to repeat, because it's quite moving.
Yeah, so this boy became very severely injured in an airstrike. He had a skull fracture that resulted in the loss of his eyesight. So Saad wasn't born blind, but he became blind as a result of this traumatic injury. I met him on two occasions. The first time in a center that is specialized in caring for children with a disability, where he was receiving physiotherapy and mental health support. He was terrified. That first time I met him, it was in the fall of 2024. His mom tried to comfort him, but he was not doing well at all that day. He still had to get used to the fact that he was blind, and so he was very afraid of every sensation, every sound. If people touched him, he didn't like it at all. Then I met him a couple of weeks later in actually the same center, as we were distributing winter clothes to very vulnerable children. So Saad was prioritized for this winter clothes distribution. And there he was much more relaxed. He actually enjoyed opening the box with the clothes because he really enjoyed touching the different types of materials. The clothes were wrapped into plastic. He was first manipulating the plastic, then his sister helped him open the plastic bags, and he could feel all the clothes inside. There was fleece, there was wool, there was cotton, and he really enjoyed playing with it and touching with it. And that was when we started to interview him and asked him what had happened to him, if he could explain to us what had happened to him. The way he put it was, my eyes went to heaven before I did. He spoke about nearly dying, but he did survive, but his eyes died. That's how he put it. And to hear that from a 5-year-old child is very impressive and just heartbreaking.
So many of the policymakers involved in what will happen, what might happen, what has happened in Gaza, in Israel, everywhere else, they're remote from what happens in many cases. What would you like them to see firsthand that would make them realize what the situation is like?
You know, what I would like is for policymakers, for donors, for journalists, for media like yourself to be able to enter Gaza and to see what's happening there firsthand. So you don't have to rely on my testimony, but you can see firsthand the scale of devastation, the way in which families live, and hopefully that will help in sort of taking conscious of what's going on and what is needed there. But for the UN, we've been reporting throughout this conflict. We've been describing what we see happening and what needs to happen. So whenever we get a new report coming out, like for instance this IPC report that highlighted that the entire population is food insecure, those reports shouldn't come as a surprise. Policymakers shouldn't wait for those reports to come out, because it's right now that children are dying and that action is needed. But please, advocate for your entry to Gaza. You should be able to enter Gaza and see what's happening there.
As I'd mentioned earlier, Rosalia, you've made a number of videos. I've seen them. And I'm wondering if UNICEF has had to kind of keep this up, and your presence there as well is to make people more aware and keep the support up. I mean, do you worry about donor fatigue? Do you worry about people turning a blind eye now because it's been going on so long?
We definitely worry about that. This just people becoming worn out. It's not a nice good news story. When you open your social media, when you turn on the TV and you see this depressing news, some people may be tempted to change channel or to just scroll down. I sometimes do myself, because it's simply unbearable. It's too much to take in. And also, sadly, Gaza isn't the only humanitarian crisis right now. There's quite a number of very important crises around the world, from Sudan to Yemen to Haiti to the DRC. And we're sort of waiting for the next thing to happen that will take all the media attention away, that will take global attention away, while in Gaza, conditions don't improve and actually worsen by the hour. So this is a very real problem that we're coping with. Yeah.
That is the tragedy of the fickleness of the news cycle. I wonder though, if what do you believe to be the biggest misconception that donors and outsiders have when it comes to Gaza?
I think there's quite a few misconceptions when it comes to donors and, for instance, our aid delivery. There's quite a few obstacles inside Gaza that we have to deal with on the one hand. And then on the other hand, there's very high expectations and very strict demands as to where the aid goes to. We, of course, want the aid to go to the most vulnerable persons in the Gaza Strip, the most vulnerable children and families. Now, in order to make that happen, in order to be able to tell a donor, okay, you paid for X number of pallets of plumpy nut, and to be able to tell that donor they went to these distribution points and there are X number of children who benefited from them, we work around the clock to package supplies, to do assessments, needs assessments, to determine what has to go where, to plan the logistics for these supplies to be moved from the warehouse to distribution points. And it's extremely time consuming in any given context. But in Gaza, we talk about a territory where infrastructure is largely damaged, where there's constant bombardments, and it's really not so obvious to move aid from A to B. When finally on May 19, UNICEF and WFP were allowed to bring in a few trucks, I got lots of requests from donors and from the media for pictures of the aid distribution that same day. And I had to explain that we would love to distribute this immediately. But for starters, trucks aren't allowed to just drive into Gaza and just rock up at our warehouse. They drive to the Israeli side of the crossing, they offload the goods there. Empty Palestinian trucks drive up to the Palestinian side of the crossing to collect the supplies there. Then they have to move from the crossing to the warehouse, which is a very dangerous move because of the risk of looting and other security risks. And then from there, it has to be repackaged and distributed. So I think lots of people make shortcuts and think that we get a batch of supplies, we put ourselves out in the middle of the street, and we just start handing it out. No, it's not obvious at all. It's not straightforward at all. We have carefully selected the children that are going to receive these supplies. Children like SAD, children with a disability, children who are malnourished, children who've lost one or both parents, pregnant women. So we need to trace these most vulnerable individuals, and then we have to make sure that it gets to them.
You know, Rosalia, one aid worker recently said that his colleagues told him not to bother asking Western governments for anything because, quote, it's too late. Have you ever felt that level of resignation? If so, what kept you going?
It's tempting to feel resignation. It's tempting to be cynical, but I think cynicism is actually a form of laziness. And because of what's going on, we cannot allow ourselves to turn into that. So it's really because of the very, very high needs inside Gaza, but also, so my team on the ground in Gaza, which consists of international and national colleagues, the national colleagues, my Palestinian colleagues, they've lost everything. Their homes are gone. Their belongings are gone. They're refugees. They come to the office every single day to cling on to some form of routine, to have the illusion that there's some normalcy. They come to the office, we go to distribution sites, they really cling on to that. And I owe it to them to continue my job. And we owe it to them to continue fundraising, to continue distributing supplies, to continue supporting healthcare professionals, Palestinian doctors who work around the clock, who risk their own lives trying to save the lives of others. Whatever support we can give them, whatever medicines they need, obstetric kits, equipment, we need to do what we can to get it to them.
You said in one of your videos, to quote you, this war should haunt every one of us. Do you get the sense that message is getting through or not?
I think in certain countries it certainly does. We do see quite some outpouring of support for the work that we do, for calls for an end to the war, but governments aren't heeding those calls. So we haven't yet arrived at a point where mobilization of people around the world has sort of turned into a change in policy, change in behavior.
When do you go back, Rosalia? Are you keen to get back?
I'm very keen to get back. Yes, I'm on a wait list. So UNICEF is currently prioritizing staffers with very specific profiles. So doctors, civil engineers, colleagues who are experts in malnutrition. But I'm very hopeful that in the coming days I'll be able to return.
Rosalia, we wish you safety and productivity in your work. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Insights into the challenges facing humanitarian organizations operating in Gaza, brought to us by UNICEF spokesperson Rosalia Bollen. Well, that's it for this episode. I'm Riz Khan. Please subscribe to the show and leave us any questions, comments, or feedback you might have. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.